There's a lot of things going on in the world right now, but one of the things that we all need to become more sensitive to is the differences that we have, whether it's race, disability, religion, age. We're different. And that brings a more richer ability to everything we do, whether it's work, whether it's friendship, life. There's a lot that we have to offer each other. But part of this is we also have to learn to listen more and to be aware of experiences that people have, and if we have biases or prejudices that we might not be aware of. For example, for me, I'm Jewish. When I was in college, I came home one day and there was a swastika carved onto the door. I slept somewhere else that night and I came back 4 hours later and the word kill was written in capital letters across the door. Anti-Semitic things happen, but a lot of times, because I'm not Black or Indian or Asian, people don't see it. I can hide my Jewish star, but it's something we really want to just put out there so that people are aware things like this happen. So I'm going to go ahead and be aware tonight's conversation is as if we're in a coffee chat. It's a dialogue, it's a conversation. It's not necessarily, a facilitation. But I am going to start off and let Spencer share with us who you are.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm grateful to be here with all of you. A little bit about myself. I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at age 3, and I walk with a mild limp, and it also impacted my speech. And currently, as right now, I'm in the process of getting my real estate license, and my other ambition is to become a public speaker and share my story.
And Spencer, has there been issues where you've been discriminated against or where people have looked at you differently?
Great question, Lisa. I get asked rude questions, and I'm always kind of off guard. And it triggers me because I feel like most people look at my physical disability and they don't take the time to get to know me. And I'm more than my disability. And therefore, I am open to sharing more about my cerebral palsy, but it's harder when people just judge you for the appearance of how I walk or talk.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Marguerite, how about for you?
Well, my prejudices used to have like a hierarchy. And when I was younger, it was racism and then a little bit of sexism. I would feel racism more often out in the workplace, even as a young female back in the early 70s. And that was a time when there was a lot of Black activism, a different type of Black activism. But recently, it's been what I'll term ageism. It is a term, and it was coined around 1969, and it has to do with discrimination based on the aging process. And I don't look at myself as the age that I am. A lot of times I forget I'm over 60. But other people who aren't over 60, they can tell that I'm over 60 or over 50, and they treat me accordingly. But accordingly now seems to be treating me as though I don't have a voice. So that when I go to the hospital or doctor's appointments and I'm helped by a patient assistant, I'll call them kids because they're in their 30s and 40s. A lot of times they'll talk to me as though I don't know what I'm talking about. They don't trust that I have a brain. And so it seems as though as I get older, I may need an advocate, because I can say the same thing that whomever is accompanying me is saying to the doctor, dentist, or whomever the person is, the professional, and they're not as acquiescing. So it's really a pretty insidious type of prejudice, because I think a lot of times that the professionals don't even realize that they're treating me as though I don't understand them, but I do. So I do have a great problem with that. Thank you.
Really good point. How about for you, Savanti? Have you faced where people have looked at you or treated you differently?
I might have an entirely different experience here, but it is not without some kind of unconscious bias. So for me, I'm a non-native speaker of English. I immigrated from India in 1995, coming up almost on 30 years here. So when I came in as an immigrant, it was almost like I was not visible to many. That was that many years ago. Now we are talking about it more openly, about somebody being visible or having a voice and being given a seat at the table. But back then it was like, I think it's you, come on in. They wouldn't even utter my name or make an effort to honor your presence. So it was almost like we were invisible at one point. I'm not generalizing, but at least that was my experience. In a small town in Dayton, we were probably a handful of immigrants who tried to go to school or get a job or do the things that everyone else was doing. So my experience, I have also grown. So to Margaret, have been different experiences where I have felt like I didn't have all the opportunity I deserved to have, or people who looked like me, spoke like me, or accomplished like me, or were different from the mainstream, were not always afforded the opportunity because we were somehow thought of as not able to step up. So for me, today in the corporate world, I work for a Fortune 50 company. I'm very privileged to be able to have those opportunities where I can make some groundbreaking difference, work on policy, work on how leadership should encourage the employment, how we can bring in change by truly walking the talk of diversity, equity, and inclusion, more focusing on the equity portion of it and not the equality, just as a notion. So that's just been my experience.
Thank you. And Lena, what about for you? Even as becoming a doctor and a dentist, what have you faced?
Well, I moved to United States, I think it was in 1995, same year as Shravanti moved. And I went to school after I had 2 children while I was a dental student, which was pretty tough. I was given the opportunity, I had to kind of repeat my dental education again because I had been out of touch for some time, and it was very hard to kind of get the advanced standing program, which is years. So I repeated 4 years of dental school, and everything was really fine, except I found that there were not too many majority students. That was in the year 2003, not too many majority students. And in fact, the women were out of a class of 70. We just had 17 women, and a few of us were minority women. On the whole, it was a good experience, except when I went to the clinics, and I think I was the only woman in that group of students, and I was the only minority woman in that group of students. And I think one of my preceptors kind of didn't really know what to make of me. And like, I think he felt that what was I doing there? And, he kind of sometimes unfair to me. And then when I complained about him, he got really nasty to the point that I had to change my group and go into another group. And I graduated finally. So that, I think, was my first brush with racism and sexism in this country. It made me stronger, and I suddenly realized, okay, this exists even now in institutions of higher education. I was more surprised because this was an elite institution, and would think when people are highly educated, they should rise above such feelings or such thought process, but it wasn't so. And I'm really glad to know that now in that particular dental school, there are so many women in the class. I was asking one of the younger dentists, how many women dentists are there? And she said, more than half the class is women dentists, and there are a lot more minorities. So things have changed. People have been aware of these prejudices existing and have made a conscious effort to try to counteract them. So I'm pretty glad to see that progress has been made. So that was my experience.
Thank you for sharing, Lena. And Tony, what about for you? Any experiences that you want to share with the group?
My experience has been one of, as you know, Lisa, when we have talked, I am intently private, where some people jokingly call me CIA because they don't know what I do. They don't know what I do. So that's become a term that some people jokingly say to me. But what I can tell you is I have tried to stay clear of the obvious, which is the racism, not ignore it and not minimize people before me that have gone through racism, because what they felt and what they went through was very traumatic and something that really happened. That's not my experience, but what I try and do is not live not live through their anger, but hear their story, be sympathetic to it, but make sure that I don't grasp a hold of, okay, he grew up in the 40s, he grew up in the 50s. Do not take on his anger because he grew up in a different time and that's why he feels the way he does. So don't minimize it. But what are your experiences? My experiences, I think my experiences have been more subtle and unknowingly. People may say things when you're not present that you don't know that they're saying. But I jokingly tell people, and this is with any Toastmasters, and one of the reasons why you should use Toastmasters is because as it relates to anyone, if you don't know how to speak properly, decisions are made about you in conference rooms that you have no idea that people in the conference room are making decisions by you about you. And you're actually walking past the conference room and it has a big window and no one taps on the window and asks you to come in, but they're actually talking about moving you to another site or asking you to be a supervisor or do something somewhere else, but they haven't asked you. You are brought in on the back end and you are informed that, hey, what do you think about working in Idaho? Okay, I don't think about working in Idaho, and I haven't told anyone I want to work in Idaho. Just as an example, and these conversations go on, and people have no idea that if you're going to have a conversation about someone, they should be part of that conversation, not on the back end, but on the front end, so you can get input from them. And ageism, as you get older, it's actually in the clause when you apply for a job that they can't ask you your age. But at least if you're sitting there and you say you went to a Barbara Streisand concert while you're at lunch with some people, the youngsters are looking at you and who is Barbara Streisand? Unknowingly, you've told them how old you are because they don't have her on their iPod or listen to her. And the first thing that pops in my, oh man, my grandmother's told me about her. So you've effectively told someone how old you are. So I don't see a point in dyeing my hair jet black and walking around looking like I'm 17 or 18, because at some point you're going to give away what your age is, whether it be 30 or 35, simply by little things that you do. And that's been my experience. And the the ageism one is the one that is really funny to me because they're not supposed to ask you your age, but if people ask you certain things, I mean, when you mention certain things in your life, oh, my daughter came to visit me from Iowa. She's 38 now. Okay, they know you have to be older than 38. You just told them how old your daughter is. So you've inadvertently told them what your age is. So I don't know how they get around that or what's the better way to do that. But that seems to be faulty in its sense because no, I didn't ask you what your age was, but you told us what you did over the weekend, and
So
you
true.
basically
So true.
let us know how old you are. So
Okay.
that's been my experience. And one of the things that I've had to learn is to be more aware of other people and what they're going through and not realize what they're going through. And your situation may be bad, but you don't know what other people are going through. So try and be sympathetic, try and have some empathy. And I've had to learn certain things, especially as it relates to females and people from other countries.
Okay. Well,
That's it.
some very good points, Tony. I am going to actually ask you, John. I mean, part of tonight's conversation was actually for me and for our audience to be able to listen and hear from different perspectives. What are your thoughts? I mean, the issue is, I mean, obviously our audience is a dental audience, but that when you have people coming into the office, whether they are elderly or have a disability or are from a different race or culture or religion, people have preconceived notions about how they think someone will act or what characteristics they have. What are you thinking as you're hearing all this tonight?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking of is I've never experienced anything like that. I mean, I was going to say I'm a white kid, but I'm not a kid anymore. I'm a white guy from the Midwest. I grew up Roman Catholic. My mom and dad were married for 50 some odd years before they both passed away. We're still married. I graduated from high school. I went to college. I went to dental school. I think a couple of things that I'd like to bring up is number one, when I was in dental school in the 80s, it was a totally different kind of culture. And there was a lot of belittling the students, treating the students like they didn't know anything. And I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it wasn't for one Black instructor. I talk to him to this day. I call him my Yoda. He took me under his wing and he taught me how to treat people respectfully, how to appreciate everyone. And his lessons he gave to me all those years ago that follow me everywhere I go today. The other thing is that over my years, I'm in a group practice, and my first partner was female. And that really opened my eyes for a lot of things that I hadn't thought about. She came in and she said, she was already in practice and we actually merged two practices together. And she said, "You don't wear a white coat." And I said, "No, I don't. I don't really like them. Sometimes I think it's kind of presumptuous." And she laughed and she said, "Fluky, I've got to wear a white coat or they think I'm a dental assistant." Never would have thought of that. We had a young man in the practice who got married and moved away. His folks were immigrants from Iraq. And he exposed me to a lot of things of the, you know, the racism that goes on, what he struggled with in school because of racism. We have a young doctor in the office now that's Korean. His folks immigrated, so he doesn't speak with an accent, but you can look at him and know he's not, you know, a white guy like me. And I think what I think is really neat is that, you know, I look around and I go, this is America. You know, unless you're a Native American, we're all from somewhere else. You know, my ancestors came from Germany in like the 1850s, but my grandpa Fluky, didn't speak any language but German until he was 5. You know, so they were from somewhere else. And that's what this is all supposed to be about. You know, the big melting pot of America is we're all supposed to look out for one another. And the one thing I would like the people watching and the folks here to know is that I have 3 kids, and if I could bring any of them in right now, the 2 things I really tried to teach them, and it's still a joke on our family. I say, what's rule number 1? And they'll say, be nice. I said, what's rule number 2? Show respect. And I always tell them, I said, you know, if you can do those 2 things, everything else is cream cheese.
That is so true. And so I think that a lot of times people just aren't necessarily aware of what situations we experience. You have to remember that with the United States, we have dentists and practices all over the country, and in smaller, more rural areas, for the most part, they may not have diversity, or they may, if someone comes into the office, they just have not seen a Jewish person or seen an Indian person before. And so, you know, just that message being, you know, take a minute to just realize that your preconceived notions over how I'm supposed to behave, or what you think, what my language is going to be, or anything, it's not necessarily the way it is. And you have to be careful not to have a bias as a professional when you're providing health care to patients. I want to give the folks a chance to be able to share if there is a message that you want to give to our viewing audience. Shravanti, is there something in particular that you think in closing that would be what you want them to take away from this?
Absolutely. I want to piggyback on just what you mentioned as almost your last statement, not to have bias, which I think is impossible. Right? If you have a brain, we have bias. It's unconscious bias that lets us make sense of the world. So we categorize notions, we categorize people, we categorize things, because that's the only way. If it's green, it's a leafy, green and leafy, it's probably good for me. It has chlorophyll. If it is red, it has, you know, antioxidants. It's good for me. That's how we categorize. Similarly, we do the same with people. People from a particular culture may have this, this, and this. People who walk in wearing a white coat or not a white coat, to John's point, maybe this or that, if you're a female or a male with or without a white coat. So I think not having a bias is impossible, but to be aware of it, that it exists, to acknowledge it, accept it, and choose to act differently by either reaching out or learning more, or to ask simple questions. Could I be biased? Why am I thinking like this? Should I have a more open mind? Should I categorize, not categorize? May I just ask to learn more about the other person? I think to acknowledge and act is what will keep us away from having what we call prejudice, which is unconscious bias turning in a very negative, unproductive, and unhealthy way. So my message would be to expect it, accept it, acknowledge it, and choose to act in a way that we can all be better people, because we want to know about other people, because we want to speak and act differently, but together. That's my message.
Thank you. How about you, Spencer? What would you want as far as just share to the audience?
Yes, all I want to say is to keep listening to your patients, because no one is the same, and others may need accommodations, and you have to constantly adapt to what your patients need. It's not about you, it's about your patient and how to make the appointment more pleasurable and easy for them. So just keep listening to your patient and make them happy, because they will keep returning back to you if they have a great experience.
Well said. And Marguerite, how about for you?
Mine leans back towards the ageism. And first of all, I'd like to say that the word prejudice may be off-putting to a lot of people. So I like the fact that Cervanti and other people have been using the word bias, because a lot of times people don't realize that they're biased. That's their normal way of operating. So they don't see anything wrong with it. I think one of the takeaways can be that if someone shares with you that you seem prejudiced or biased, that be receptive to what they're saying, because the way that you think you're projecting may not be what they're saying. You're not projecting in the way that you think you are. Also, as far as going to doctor's appointments and things like that, I don't like when my doctor turns their back on me, even when they're on a computer or they're putting something in the computer, or when an assistant comes in and they're speaking audibly so that I can hear that they're talking obviously about something that's going on with me, whether it be in my mouth or on my body. And when I ask, oh, what are you talking about? Even if they're referencing an x-ray or something, they say, oh, we'll be right with you. I don't like that. That's dismissive to me. So I would want the professional audience to be aware that there are behaviors and mannerisms, body language that you exhibit that's a real turnoff to the patient. And as a patient, lots of times I try not to say anything because I don't want to tick anyone off. But the bottom line is that I feel that no one in their professional role is smarter than I am. So that when you're talking, maybe your language is different because now you have a code, you've learned the language. But don't do that to me. Don't talk to me as though I won't understand what you're saying if you break it down for me, and don't act like you're breaking it down for me like you're dummying down. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Marguerite. How about for you, Lena?
So the takeaway I have is my first experience, facing racism. It was an eye-opener for me, but on the other hand, also made me sympathetic towards what others go through, because unless you experience it, you will not be sympathetic what other people go through. So that, I think, was a really nice eye-opener, because, you will understand it better now when somebody speaks to me about how they are being treated, or like how, they are being perceived. You have been in that position. So I think, in a way, if you think those experiences, I look at them also in a positive way for my own growth as a human being, for me to be more empathetic. And of course, I feel that in a professional setting, I would advise the young doctors to go outside the comfort zone and to do residencies where, the demographics are completely different from where they are coming from. Because when you work with people who are different from you, you will learn. There might be a learning curve, but you will definitely, just being with people who are different from you, having friends who are different from you, instead of just being in groups of similar kinds, just go outside your comfort zone and you will learn so much about them. I worked in a nonprofit organization, which was mostly African American, and I learned so much from my assistants about the hardships in their life. And I thought to myself, they are so brave, going through some of the stuff they would talk about and still come to work smiling and do their job. And I was like, wow, they were in kind of a way, I thought they were like heroes, because, they had some tough odds to face in their life. So that's what I would say. Just go outside your comfort zone, meet people from different regions, and just know about their life story. And people will learn so much more. And I think that will also counteract prejudice and bias. That's my take on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. And how about for you, Tony?
I'll try and be as succinct as possible, ma'am. Your trump card is respect. As if I'm not mistaken, John said, when in doubt, treat people with respect. You'd be surprised how far it goes. I'll tell you something real simple that people don't realize that they do to me or they do to people just in general. If a young lady were to come up to me and introduce herself as Peggy, I wouldn't turn around and say, "Oh, you're Margaret." No, she didn't introduce herself as Margaret. She introduced herself as Peggy. There's a reason why she calls herself Peggy. Address her in the way that she introduced herself. If he introduces himself as Robert, do not call him Bob. There's probably a reason why he introduced himself as Bob, as Robert. If he says something different, says it doesn't matter, then you're fine, but don't assume. And I get it sure enough. Every time someone comes up to me, they feel that it's their right to call me Anthony. I have never introduced myself as Anthony. Never. I am Tony. There's a story behind it and there's a reason. But he feels compelled, and I have never given him the okay to do it. He calls me Anthony.
And I think you bring up a really good point, and then we'll get to John, but names are important. And even when someone has a longer name like Savanti Valampati has, it is respectful for me to make sure that I am calling her by her name. Her parents or whomever gave her that name. And I think that a lot of times, unfortunately, Indian friends or different folks with long names will shorten it to make it easier for everybody to remember or to say it correctly. And I'm a recruiter, and I am just very, very careful that always, particularly with interesting spellings of names, long or short, get clarification that, Savanti, am I saying your name correctly? I really want to get it right. And I think that that matters. So it's not about it being easier for me to be able to say, hey, you. It's that I'm being respectful that this is the name that you want to be called, and we're given. So John, your thoughts. I truly do not mean to put you on the spot with this particular topic, but what I found is that, just how we're listening and hearing each other tonight has just been very meaningful. What would your takeaway be for our audience?
I want to tell a short story. So at one point in my career, I was doing laser training for a company. And so frequently on Fridays, Thursday night, I'd fly out of KC. I'd go to some faraway place in the US, and I would teach the doctor and the team about clinical usage of lasers. And one day I flew out to LA, and I don't know much about LA. And the doctor was second generation Korean. And when I got to his office, it was in what they call Koreatown in LA. And when I met him, we were talking. He was like, yeah, my folks moved here from Korea. He said, but there's a lot of people in this area that are immigrants. They don't speak English very well, and they love me because I speak Korean. And so I was there with them all day, and I heard very little English, but the people loved him. And the real important part of the story is he and I went to lunch, and he said, there's this great restaurant. It was, we were in downtown LA. He's like, there's a great restaurant. It's a couple blocks. We'll walk down there. And so we did. And as we got to the door, his cell phone rang. And so he said, go on in, I'll be in a second. I said, okay. So I went in. Everyone in the restaurant was Korean. We hadn't passed a white person on the street. It was just like being in a Korean town. And I walked in the door, and it was a small restaurant, and there was all this lively conversation. And when I walked in, there was just a hush, and everybody turned to look at me. And for the first time in my life, I thought, that's what it feels like. And that was a tremendous, tremendous learning experience for me, because I thought, this is what my Black friends go through. This is what my Indian friends go through. This is what my Hispanic friends that speak with an accent go through. And I'd never gone through that before in my life. And I think everybody needs to go through that at least once to understand what it's like, because a big shaft of light came down and hit me that day.
That's so true. And John, I can relate to that on a bus once, and I had that same sense and that understanding of now what my friends go through.
Yeah.
And what other people do. So I want to thank our guests tonight for coming and joining. We may not all be in the dental field, but definitely we all have something to contribute to help as we're continuing to help people to become aware of unconscious bias, or just the sense that we need to respect each other and listen. And this time when we listen, to really hear what people are saying. And just want to thank our group tonight for joining us. So thank you.